Assalamu alaikum and welcome to Views on News. We'll be talking about the Indian atrocities in Indian occupied Jammu and Kashmir and the fact the recent surge in violence, the fact that Pakistan of course has condemned it and the international community and its role and what we can expect, and whether the international community will play a role in condemning the very real surge of violence we've recently seen as far as the Indian occupied Kashmir is concerned. Of course, the Hindutva inspired extremism that is being exhibited quite openly as far as India's role is concerned, the BJP, RSS, all of those things, the fact that India has sent thousands of troops into Indian occupied Kashmir and the brutalities and the violence is simply unimaginable. We'll be talking about all of that today. We'll be talking about the international response, if why it's lacking, our role as far as the UN is concerned. We'll be asking our representative in the UN, Munir Akram, about how he perceives what the future can hold and what kind of a reaction we can expect from the international community. All of that today on Views on News. Let's go to Munir Akram. Ji, can you hear me?
I can hear you.
Thank you so much for making the time to join us. Could you tell us a little bit about how you perceive the situation to be as far as the international community's role in what's happening, reaction to what's happening as far as the surge in violence in the Indian occupied Kashmir is concerned?
I think the international community is well aware of the Indian repression in Jammu and in occupied Jammu and Kashmir, and is cognizant of India's crimes. At the political level, at the state level, India has certain powers which are protecting it from international condemnation. And although there is widespread knowledge about India's crimes, these powers, for their own strategic reasons and their relationship with India, they are reticent to allow the adoption of clear-cut decisions by the international community. Therefore, our focus has been to generate support from the human rights defenders, from the institutions which have been set up by the Human Rights Council and other human rights bodies, with regard, for example, the Special Rapporteur on extrajudicial killings is directly concerned with this. And these Special Rapporteurs, about 18 Special Rapporteurs, have expressed their concern about the free fall in human rights in India and in occupied Jammu and Kashmir. So that is the first route that we have to take. But at the same time, we have to keep apprising the international community, the United Nations, about India's violations, and to continue to look for avenues by which action can be taken to hold India accountable for its crimes.
But in terms of international, like you mentioned, that there are certain Indian, at the state level, there are certain realities as far as India is concerned. How do we agitate on an international level? Do the efforts that are being made at this time, do they need to be, of course, accelerated? How do you see the overall response of the international community?
Well, I think, Pakistan is the voice of the Kashmiri people. And therefore, we have to raise our voice. We have submitted the dossier on India's atrocities recently to the United Nations and the Secretary General. We have kept the Secretary General and the relevant UN bodies informed of the progressive violations that India has continued to make in occupied Jammu and Kashmir. And therefore, we have to continue that process. We have to go to the human rights mechanisms which have been set up to address situations of violations of this nature. I mentioned the Special Rapporteur on extrajudicial killings. There are Special Rapporteurs on religious freedom. There are Special Rapporteurs on freedom of association, freedom of expression. All those human rights mechanisms have to be kept apprised, and we are doing that. We are keeping the international mechanisms fully apprised of India's crimes. We are, at the same time, we are looking for modalities that could be more formalized, such as an inquiry commission, such as moving against India under certain conventions of the United Nations, such as the Racial Discrimination Convention, the Convention on Genocide. These are, of course, legal mechanisms which we will need to follow. But at the moment, India has basically politically blocked us in the Security Council and in certain other bodies. But nevertheless, we have to continue the campaign. We have to keep the international community apprised of India's crimes and to look for ways in which we can hold the Indians accountable for these crimes.
Why do you feel, I mean, other than of course the realities at this time as far as India is concerned, the fact that it's a huge market and the influence that it has overall, why do you think that there has been a lack of response from the international community overall as far as Kashmir is concerned? Because of course, you know, we are seeing a direct, you know, and another side to the story as far as now we are seeing a lot of interest as far as Afghanistan is concerned. Also, you know, there is of course the Palestine issue, issues of human, you know, where we're seeing these kind of brutalities, and Kashmir unfortunately has not fared well on that list.
Well, you know, we have to distinguish between an intergovernmental response and the response at the level of public opinion, the response at the level of those who are the mechanisms that have been established for the protection of human rights. Public opinion is fairly well cognizant of Indian atrocities, and I think that there is general agreement that India is in grave violation of international human rights and humanitarian law. The special mechanisms, as I mentioned, are also convinced of India's violations of human rights as such. It is at the political level, in the Security Council, other intergovernmental bodies, where India has very influential friends, and you know who they are. And these are the friends who have blocked resolutions on Kashmir, but also on Palestine, for example. You know, equally grave violations have taken place in Palestine. You saw what happened a few months ago with the bombardment of Gaza, and the Security Council was unable to condemn that. And that is because the big powers which hold veto rights are able to protect their friends. And that is the reality of international circumstances. And we have to...
Right. In terms of consistency, as far as Pakistan is concerned, of course, we've seen the response of this government on the issue of Kashmir. But do you think that perhaps, as far as overall our, you know, consistency is concerned on the issue of Kashmir, perhaps we could have done better in the way that we put it forward to the international community, in the way that we brought up the case of Kashmir, the way we pleaded the case of Kashmir? Do you think that perhaps has been a factor that could be identified in perhaps you know, not getting the kind of response that we would have liked?
Well, you know, there is of course a reality that for 50 years we did not take the issue of Jammu and Kashmir to the Security Council, and therefore downgraded its relevance and importance at the international level and in the United Nations. It was only this government which 2 years ago raised the issue at the United Nations. We took it to the Security Council. The Security Council has met 3 times. The majority of the Security Council members agree with us that there are grave violations of human rights, that the dispute over Jammu and Kashmir constitutes a threat to international peace and security. I spoke about that in the Security Council day before yesterday, and drew the attention of the Security Council to the fact that there is a threat of war, a threat of conflict between 2 nuclear armed states, and this should be a priority for the Security Council to act on that. and on the grave violations of human rights. But the reality is in the Security Council. There are veto-wielding members which have protected India and have prevented a decision. But it is our job, it is our mission to raise this issue and keep this issue in front of the international community. And we have succeeded in internationalizing this issue once again after 50 years of basically relevant silence on our part. So I think such a campaign takes time. We will have to convince the major governments who are protecting India that their professions of support for human rights, their professions of support for international peace and security should lead them to support the case of Kashmir, to support the right of self-determination for the Kashmiri people. And this effort obviously is a campaign. We have to take this campaign at the United Nations, in the capitals of these major countries, and try to change their policy position on the issue.
Right. Do you think that as far as the role of the Islamic countries is concerned and the OIC is concerned, we haven't we wouldn't be wrong to say that we haven't got the kind of response from the Islamic world, so to speak, on the issue of Kashmir. Again, Pakistan again has tried to go down that route also. We've pleaded the case of Kashmir there also. Why is there a lack of response from there also?
You see, I think we've got good support from from the Islamic countries. All the major resolutions that are adopted by the Islamic Conference always has a very strong resolution on Jammu and Kashmir, which obviously we have not been able to get from other organizations. But it's a question of how far you want to go and how far you want to press friends who have trade relations and other relations with India, and how far they're able to go. We are pushing the envelope as far as we can. We've got good support. We have to build on that support. I think we do not serve our cause by denigrating the Islamic Conference. I think our friends there go very far in supporting us in the Islamic Conference, and we have to build on that support.
What about the role of the Kashmiri diaspora all over the world?
Well, I think the Kashmiri diaspora of course, there's a large Kashmiri diaspora. What is lacking, I think, is a proper organization of the diaspora. I think they have to adopt a singular message and not become divided amongst themselves on various paths to follow, whether they will follow the path of referendum, whether they want independence, whether accession to Pakistan. Sometimes the Kashmiri diaspora, becomes sidetracked, and this is, of course, in part due to the very insidious campaign that is promoted by the Indians to sidetrack the Kashmiri struggle, and at times they've succeeded in taking the Kashmiri diaspora into paths of arguing about whether the accession to Pakistan is better or independence is better, what is allowed in the Security Council resolutions, etc., etc. These are issues which are used to sidetrack them and to divide them. And therefore, I think what we need is a unified position. We need a unified voice of the Kashmiri people, a platform which is singular and is single-minded in pursuing the cause of Kashmir. And we can do much better, I think.
Are we working towards establishing that kind of platform? Do you think, are we taking any steps at this time towards, making that kind of, establishing that kind of platform?
Yes, of course. We are working not only here, but in other capitals as well to unify the Kashmiri diaspora, to unify the Pakistani diaspora as well in support of Kashmir, because we have to work together. And in various capitals, we have to influence the legislatures, the politicians, the political parties, and thereby influence the policies of these countries. And it is possible in democracies to try and change policies through public opinion. And we have to do that because at the government level, at the interstate level, there are strategic interests, there are economic and commercial interests which have pushed these countries towards adopting a India-friendly posture. And we have to convince them that the moral issue of human rights violations, the moral issue of suppression and colonial occupation of a people deserves their support because they justify their raising of human rights in international forums. They talk about human rights everywhere, but when it comes to their interests, they become silent. So we have to work hard in capitals to change the policies of these so-called democracies and human rights defenders and bring them to align their policies with what their expressions on human rights are.
Right. Thank you so much for being with us, Munir, Akram Saab. Thank you for your very valuable time. We have guests in studio with us, Altaf Hussain Wani, who is a Kashmiri leader, also Vice Chairman, Jammu and Kashmir National Front. Thank you for joining us today. Also, we have with us Amir Hussain, who's a columnist, journalist. Thank you for joining us today. Before we go on to discuss the prevalent situation with Altaf Saab and Amir Saab, we will there's a report that we'd like you to see on the brutalities that are actually happening and the situation on the ground in Indian occupied Kashmir.
The recent spell of the terroristic atrocities of Indian security forces, 2 men were martyred alongside 2 freedom fighters in Indian illegally occupied Jammu and Kashmir in a staged gunfire. The shootout was staged inside a commercial center in Srinagar, which killed 2 civilians, including the building's owner Mohammad Altaf Bhatt and tenant Mudassir Ahmed. Inspector General of Police Vijay Kumar claimed on 15th November 2021 that both civilians were working as terror associates. However, the witnesses and families of civilians said that the Indian troops used them as human shields during the standoff. Dozens of the relatives of these 2 civilians staged a protest in the disputed region on 17th November 2021, pleading the authorities to return their bodies. But the bodies of these civilians were secretly buried in the middle of night without the presence of their relatives. National Security Advisor Moeed Yusuf warned India in a series of tweets that no amount of systemic brutalities, rampant use of force and brutal clampdowns can suppress the indigenous struggle of Kashmiris. Moreover, Dr. Moeed asserted that the extrajudicial killing of innocent Kashmiris in Hyderpura, Srinagar by the fascist Modi regime only confirmed what Pakistan has stated in its dossier on fake encounters in the held territory. Foreign Office spokesperson Asim Iftikhar on 18th November 2021 said that the recent killing spree of innocent Kashmiris by Indian occupation forces exposes the unspeakable violence being perpetrated by the Hindutva-inspired extremist BJP-RSS combine that has turned Indian illegally occupied Jammu and Kashmir into an inferno. He added that the Indian occupation forces have martyred at least 30 Kashmiris in fake encounters and so-called cordon and search operations since 1st October 2021.
Right, Altaf Saab, how do you see the situation? You heard Munir Saab. It seems to be a very difficult situation, to say the least, trying to permeate this cloud around the reaction that we've seen of the international community. Seems a very difficult task. How do you see the situation at this time?
Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. First of all, let me come to the fake encounter which took place in Hyderpura day before yesterday. The way Indian occupation forces extrajudicially and used as human shield 3 civilians there, and thereby now it has become a normal in Indian occupied Jammu and Kashmir to the Indian occupation forces to kill the Kashmiri people and then tag them as overground workers or militants, and thereby earn the rewards and promotions from the Indian state, because Indian state is paying to the military officer for killing a Kashmiri 36 lakh Indian rupees. So this is a way of, has become an industry of rewards and promotions for the Indian government. Now coming over the situation what Ambassador Munir Akram was telling us, you see, to some extent the way the international intervention on Kashmir, on the human rights systems, from the human rights machinery, from the international human rights watchdogs, it's overwhelming. It's overwhelming. And it's because these days, despite India has curtailed the internet, it has surveillance on the social media sites in Kashmir, it has also restrictions on the media in Kashmir, but despite all that, Kashmiris are able to carry out their message and separate it to the all over the world, and thereby international organizations and human rights systems like the Munir Akram was telling us about the special rapporteurs, they in past 2 years issued at least 9 communications to the government of India on different perspectives. But when it comes to the awareness of Kashmir at intergovernmental level, that is the responsibility of our political leadership, that is the responsibility of our government. When we come to the human rights machinery and all that, the interventions we have seen, these interventions we see it's because of the sacrifices which the people of Kashmir are laying down, and international human rights organizations, they did produce these reports. Before in 2018 you see a report from the High Commissioner of Human Rights, we saw a report from another report in 2019 from the High Commissioner, and before that we have a wealth of information in the international human rights systems and international human rights organizations producing on Kashmir. But the way the situation, the way India has been misleading the world for last 20 years, I say, by creating that disinformation lab and producing disinformation to the international community, maligning Pakistan and maligning, branding Kashmir freedom struggle as a terrorist struggle and all that, that has created a smoke all over the world. It was the need of the hour from our government, from our diaspora, as well as from all other stakeholders to make such efforts so that what misinformation they have spread all over the world, we should create such a mechanism so that that vanishes, and we present the clear case in the international community. Munir Akram Sahab was right in telling us that international community, like the big powers, they have their own economic and strategic interests, but there comes the diplomacy. There comes the efficiency of diplomacy to convince the governments about their role on what they have promised in the UN Charter, what they have promised to the people of Kashmir, what they have been doing, and we have to take this in that way to the international community and create some sort of space for ourselves. We cannot say just the people have the interests with India and all that. Because of that, we see that despite all that, we see the UN Secretary General and all those are telling
certainly
Kashmir.
Can't dismiss it as that. I mean, of course, I'm sure you agree with Altaf Sahab, and I think Munir Sahab also said essentially the same thing. But you have to, how do you take it on an, I mean, he talked about intergovernmental diplomacy, so to speak. How are we doing on intergovernmental diplomacy, in your opinion?
Well, I think it has a history. The dispute of Jammu and Kashmir has a long history. You know, the UN resolutions are there in 1948. India went to the UN in 1948. Nehru was there, and in those resolutions, Pakistan and India have certain obligations to undertake. One was the right of self-determination for the people of not only Valley but also Jammu, Ladakh, Gilgit-Baltistan and Azad Kashmir. The whole region comprised the princely state of Jammu and Kashmir. And there was an instrument of accession signed between Indian government and Hari Singh, the last king of the princely state, where it was some freedoms were guaranteed in that instrument of accession. In that the state subject rule was given to the people of Riyasat, people of the Riyasat or state, which allowed them to have their own internal autonomy, their own legislation legislation. The Constituent Assembly was then it was dissolved in August 5. The 370 and 35A, these were two constitutional provisions in Indian constitution which were revoked without any consultation and with very through brutal force and all that. and we have seen the violence is going on. But problem with this issue is that it is in the UN, but in the Chapter 6 of the UN, which is a non-obligatory. The UN has a non-obligatory role. It has only mediation role. It cannot impose any solution. The solution will be chalked out between India and Pakistan through negotiation. So in Simla Agreement 1972, when India and Pakistan signed the Simla Agreement, they agreed upon certain things that including state of Jammu and Kashmir and other outstanding issues will be resolved through negotiation and bilateral talks. So it is now a bilateral issue. That is why it is not getting internationalized. When we go to the international forums, if they dispute, the international community says that it is between you and India to resolve and come up with the solution.
Isn't it true that this is India's narrative when they say that it is a bilateral issue? What we say is that it is actually a gross violation of human rights. So
Absolutely.
It's not really
that is
a bilateral issue anymore.
Actually, when we talk about the UN resolutions, when we talk about the Shimla Agreement, the Shimla Agreement cannot supersede the UN resolutions. Because none of the governments, neither government of India nor government of Pakistan has submitted their Shimla Agreement to the United Nations. And United Nations resolutions are they're alive, and that's why the UN Secretary General and the UN High Commissioner vocally said that right to self-determination of people of Jammu and Kashmir is there, and that should be respected. What Amir was telling us that there was an accession. First of all, that accession was disputed. That what India took the plea that they had an accession, but at the same time, India has in a way surrendered. If there was an accession, India surrendered that accession in the United Nations when they agreed upon for a plebiscite in Indian occupied in the whole of Jammu and Kashmir at that time. So that accession has no place now. And coming over to that, at present, when we see after August 5th all that, whatever the constitutional guarantees Indian government has given to the people of Indian occupied Jammu and Kashmir, those constitutional guarantees were also abrogated. So that was the only link, constitutional link was Article 370, which has the government of India. That has no now that so the legal experts say India has once again occupied the territory, and this is now the illegal occupation.
Let me come back to you. I'm going to go to Lieutenant General retired Raza Khan, who's with us. General Raza, we're talking about intergovernmental efforts, intergovernmental diplomacy as far as the issue of Kashmir is concerned. What's your take on this? How are we faring? What are our efforts as far as championing the Kashmiri cause is concerned?
Okay, Bismillah. I think the government and the people of Pakistan are doing whatever they can and whatever is in their power. And I think the government's Kashmir policy is directly related to Pakistan's abilities and capabilities under the obtaining international and domestic environment. Having said that, I'll first like to briefly comment on what has already been said and then give my views on the bigger issue related to Kashmir. First of all, talking of the instrument of accession, I think that instrument is a fake instrument because I think international authors have very clearly determined that when the Maharaja of Kashmir came to Srinagar, to Jammu, for the purpose of signing the instrument of surrender in front of the Indian representative, then I think he was not able to come there, and he was actually able to come the next day. But the Indian government claimed at the time that he has signed that document, and presently that document in its original form does not exist anywhere in the world. We can challenge them, they'll not be able to find it. Secondly, if you look at the language of the many United Nations security resolutions passed at the time, both in 48 and thereafter, I think the language speaks for itself. Although it is not been passed under Chapter 7 of the UN resolutions, but it has some very mandatory clauses, like the establishment of the plebiscite commission, and it says that India and Pakistan will, I mean, look at the language that it has been used. It is also very clearly stated that a plebiscite will be held in Kashmir. These were the 2 points about that. Now I'll take you back, you know, to the promises and the rationale given by the Modi administration on the 5th of August for whatever they did there. They claimed 5 things, and they said that there will be peace and tranquility after, you know, the Article 370 is withdrawn. They said there will be prosperity. They said that everyone will be happy and there will be influx of foreign investments and people will be given greater rights and privileges. I think none of them has happened. What has actually happened is that this has drawn China effectively into the conflict, and the Kashmir conflict is no more a domestic or internal issue of India. It is an issue between 3 nuclear powers now, which is India, Pakistan and China, and also the people of Kashmir. It has actually made India the world leader in internet shutdown, and this has been stated by the United States and the international media. It is now the world leader in deployment of forces to control any freedom struggle, you know, in the recorded history. Like right now, they have 950,000 troops to control about 8.5 million people, which puts 1 Indian soldier to roughly about every 9 Kashmiri. So it has never happened anywhere in the world. It also places India as the world leader on expenditure to control freedom movements. So far from 1950 up to now, they have spent close to $1 trillion, and this is what they are hiding, and I am now quoting Indian reports on this. Even, you know, now the pro-Kashmiri leaders in the past, they are extremely annoyed and unhappy with these decisions. Then the people of Jammu and Ladakh again are very angry because the Indian government invited non-Kashmiris to their places, tried to sell land to them. So they want that those people should be evicted because they are not entitled to purchase their lands, and many of them they have gone back. And we also know that the United States Commission for International Religious Freedom has condemned India about that, and they've actually recommended that economic and diplomatic sanctions should be applied to Indian leaderships and their military leaderships in Kashmir. So I think that is the situation on ground right now. Coming back now, you know, to the responsibility.
Let me come back to you. I will go to Altaf Sahab. Ji, Altaf Sahab, you've been following what General Sahab is saying.
Yes, General Sahab was right in his comments the way the India is conducting Kashmir. When we come to the living back the history of Kashmir, what has been said and what is there, that everybody knows. This is no matter that whether it was in chapter 6 or it was in chapter 7, but these were the unanimous resolutions. There was no walkout, there was no absentia in these resolutions. India accepted these resolutions. So this United Nations has a moral responsibility, Security Council has a moral responsibility as well as a legal responsibility to implement this. But we come to Kashmir, what's happening now, how to...
But when we talk about... Okay, but when we talk about moral responsibility as far as the United Nations is concerned, how far and how often, in your opinion, has the UN acted on moral responsibility?
See, when we talk of United Nations, we sometimes see that is perhaps a person he has a responsibility. It's a community of nations.
Yes, of course.
So the people as ambassador,
those nations having their own vested interests,
that they have their own vested interest and all that. And over the period of time, it was India with the passage of time. You see. To start with, international community, except from USSR, all were with our side, and they sided with us at that time. And each of the resolutions was drafted by those who are this time on the Indian side. This is the history, what we see just now. But at present, when we see what is happening in Kashmir, this should be a concern for those world leaders who took no time to send their troops, to activate NATO, to the Libya, when only 12 people were killed in Libya. Those leaders who took NATO to Afghanistan, those leaders who took NATO to Iraq and other places around the globe, why don't they act in Kashmir? Are Kashmiris not the sons of the same God, or not we the same humans? We are the same humans, we have the same blood. So at least world leaders should have this courage to condemn these human rights violations which India is perpetrating. You see, from last 33 years, there has been a series of massacres in Kashmir, and government of India takes refuge always against the public outrage. They establish some judicial commission and all that, but till date 506 judicial inquiries were constituted in Indian occupied Kashmir, but none of the inquiry report was presented till date, and nobody was made accountable for that. So the purpose is that all the efforts of ours, from our diaspora, from our government, from all the people should be to make the world to realize this will not be just by statements, but all that. I think our foreign minister will have to tour to the international capitals to sensitize the world opinion about that. When we say there's a nuclear flashpoint between India and Pakistan, and now the third party China is there, but the people should see it like it is a flashpoint. There is a response from the other side. The one side is committing genocide in Kashmir. They are killing the people of Kashmir, but we say that there will be we try to
out, it has to be brought home.
We see we have seen it in past. Sometimes the reactions from the government, sometimes all that. To some extent, we were able to stop this bloodshed. To some extent, though the promises were never fulfilled, but this bloodshed was stopped. But this time, we have given concessions, one-sided concessions, and India is keeping on. We thought that.
Well, I think
yes, please.
Yeah, I think we have to look at both the legal and political side of this dispute. It is a history, as I told you. Pakistan has been pushing for the rights of the people of Jammu and Kashmir. We have always seen our media, our diplomats, our people have strong passion with the Kashmir attached to it, and rightly so, because it was occupied by India illegally. The instrument of accession that I
what Altaf Sahab is saying, I think, goes back to the consistency element of it. You think that our aggressive stance as far as Kashmir is concerned has retained its consistency over time. That also is an issue.
Yeah, that's very big issue, because that's why when I said there has to be a certain diplomatic maturity looking at the Kashmir dispute at a larger interstate dispute between India and Pakistan. Well, now
although I will have to say that as far as the issue of Kashmir is concerned, not other issues, barring other issues, we do see the political leaderships across the board come together.
And we have the unanimous action.
And outcry as far as the issue
political
of
leadership
is concerned,
and that is the positive thing. And I think one of the most important thing is that instrument of accession was also temporary. If you look at the VP Hannan has written a lot of books on that. The Indian testimonials say that Indians were not serious about Kashmir in 1948 even. So what Maharaja did in 24th of October 1940, 26th of October 1947, he was forced to sign an accession, but the accession was a temporary arrangement. It was
the realities of now.
The realities of now is that now where the international community is not coming up with a larger posture toward Kashmir issue, because what we see in Palestine and other international issues, Kashmir has been a bit of a doldrum for two reasons. One is that the Indian global corporate interest is such large and huge that they are trying to influence everywhere in the big economies. In G8 meetings, in the UN Security Council, they blocked many resolutions that Pakistan wanted to go for. So we have to then come up with the regional,
what about our diplomatic efforts, all over otherwise, as far as
the first thing that the Pakistan's foreign minister Sir Zafar Ali Khan, when he went to the UN, his speech is evident that he wanted to say that we are going to have this dispute not because of our willing the people of Kashmir. It was the colonial legacy. The colonial power wanted to create a sort of state. This is a colonial history as well. But I think from 1960s and 70s, we have not been actually promoting the diplomatic overtures within the larger international community towards the resolution of towards addressing the issue and the atrocities that India has committed and now committing. We have the emotions, we have all the passion, we have all the sympathies with the people.
What about lobbying?
The lobbying is the one of the area where we have been very weak. The Prime Minister Imran Khan has been.
Raza, I'll come back to you. Ji, Ramsab, what about lobbying? Isn't it an area we've consistently been weak in, internationally on the issue of Kashmir?
Okay, look, I think I'll first talk of the bigger picture and then I'll specifically answer you. I think when we talk of the responsibility, the immediate responsibility lies with all the Muslim neighbors of India, because they, I think, are well aware of the situation, and I think it affects every one of them, and this includes Pakistan. Thereafter, it is the role of the OIC, I think, who are supposed to be the representatives of all Muslims of the world, including Kashmiris. Then we are talking of the United States and the EU, who are supposed to be the champions of all kinds of human rights. The role of UN, we have already talked of. Then human rights for.
Sorry, I think a problem with audio. Ji, Amir Sahib, you were saying.
Well, I think we have to look at the larger, international
lobbying,
lobbying and networking. One is the Islamic states. Unfortunately, Islamic.
You heard what Munir Sahib said about OIC. He said that we've actually had a good response. He said that
there's a response coming from OIC. But again, when we talk about the diplomatic engagement, we have to develop a consistent strategy of engagement of the international powers. China is one of the areas, because China is also a stakeholder in the larger dispute, because it has 35,000 square kilometers of area is with China from Ladakh side. So it is also one of the stakeholders. So first take those stakeholders into confidence, and then go for the international community. Build your lobbying in Europe, in the Western countries, in America, but also in the Islamic world. Though we have response, but I think the response must be articulated into diplomatic actions that will help to end the atrocities in Indian occupied Jammu and Kashmir.
General Raza, sorry we got interrupted. There was a problem with audio. Please continue.
So I don't know how much of what I was saying you heard.
We were talking. We were talking about diplomacy overall, and you said the role of the OIC and the Islamic neighbors needs to be underlined.
And then I'd like to follow it up with that. It's the role of the United States, the EU, of all the Human Rights Watch and the Amnesty International. But when it comes to awareness, through lobbying or through other, means, then I think you need money and funding for that. Unfortunately, there is no international Kashmir fund as such. The government of Pakistan itself cannot afford, to spare money for this effort. And because this is an international issue now, therefore, I think all Muslim countries should contribute for the international awareness for the issue of Kashmir. Also, for the purpose of the Kashmiri, the unity of all Kashmiris all over the world, particularly the Kashmiri diaspora, and I would also include in this all the Kashmiri leaders inside the Indian held Kashmir. Right now, we know that there are more than 10 political parties there. Actually, there should be only one political party which should be struggling for their independence and freedom in accordance with the UN Security Council resolutions. So I think the dossiers again which the government of Pakistan has prepared, they need to be shared with the media, they need to be propagated, they need to be actually discussed time and again on your programs, so that the international community, obtains more awareness of the issue of Kashmir. And I think only then the international lobbying would work. And I think the lobbying is not only required in the Western capitals, particularly those countries who are the permanent members of the UN Security Council, but also in the influential OIC member countries, the Middle Eastern countries. And unless that happens, I think the issue of Kashmir probably will stay on the back burner.
Your very valuable input. Unfortunately, we're out of time. Thank you for joining us, Altaf, Hussain, Wani Saab. Thank you for being with us. Amir, Hussain, thank you for joining us today. Lieutenant General Raza Khan, thank you for being with us. As far as the issue of Kashmir is concerned, of course, Pakistan has always championed the cause of the Kashmiris. The recent brutalities, the way that we presented the dossier, all of those things stand. But of course, as far as consistency is concerned, the way we've seen this government move forward on the issue of Kashmir, we hope that that will continue. Regardless, over time, and once, of course, engaging the diaspora is concerned, we talked about that also. We talked about lobbying, all of those things consistently and over time, we hope will make a difference as far as the issue of Kashmir and the issue of brutalities and the killings, the way the children being killed, in Kashmir overall, the situation in Kashmir, and actually having an effect on the world, having them react is concerned. Thank you so much for joining us today on Views on News.